Hello and welcome to the very first exciting Blenderman Renderman for Blender tutorial. Try saying that one 5 times fast. Or hell, even 1 time fast for that matter. Anyway, today we are going to go over displacement in Renderman, which is a very cool feature that happens on render based on your textures and saves you a lot of modeling time. It's a very prevalent feature in professional rendering engines, or commercial rendering engines, like V-Ray or Arnold, and especially Renderman. Renderman is particularly good at it. To get there, I'm going to go over setting up the basics of the interface to render in IT, and then the very absolute basics of procedural textures in Renderman. So let's go ahead and get started. I have created this scene here, just a smoothed cube, and inside of it a sphere. I created the cube to get some nice bounce lighting. We're going to go ahead and move our light over here. Save because it crashes a lot. It's still a beta thing. Then we're going to come up here and change this to PRMan render. Change our area light to add a Renderman node tree and set the exposure to about 6 is pretty good. Then to render in IT, which we want to do, not the Blender interface, come over here to render and hit keep UI, come over here to output and hit IT. Save again because it crashes. The reason we want to render in IT instead of the Blender interface is because when you render in IT, it actually shows the progress of your render, while rendering in the Blender interface does not. So, continuing right along, we're going to come over here and add a new material to our backdrop. Add Renderman node tree, make it gray, turn off the specular, just because we want a nice soft background. We're going to come over to our sphere and add a Renderman node tree. Great, so if we go ahead and, I'm going to turn the samples down actually to about 50 just so it goes fast. We go ahead and hit render. It's probably going to be, there we go. So we've got a nice little sphere, but you'll notice that it's faceted and the background is not, even though it is right here. The reason for that, this is probably going to crash soon by the way, is that I have the Subdivision Surface modifier on the backdrop but not on the sphere. So if I add Subdivision Surface, even though you can still see the faceting, Renderman will subdivide it all the way and give us a very nice smooth sphere if you just give it a second here. I think it's going a little bit slow just because I'm recording at the same time. Great, so we have a smooth sphere. We're going to go ahead and exit that. Scale this down a bit just to give us a little bit more room to work with. And let's hop right into materials. We're going to go ahead and start the interactive render. It's probably going to crash. I'm not going to cut out crashes just because I'm expecting it to crash pretty frequently. Anyway, if I go ahead and hit start interactive render, it crashes. Surprise, surprise. Open it up. That's why we save frequently. Save, start interactive render, and it will start right up. You can't interact with Blender until it's sort of done its thing over here, so we're just going to give it a nice little second here to get caught up. You'll know that it's ready when it says interactive render mode in the viewport. See? PRMan interactive render mode running. Great. Big bright red text, easy to see and notice. Then we're going to hop over here to the node editor, to our Renderman nodes. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger because now this no longer matters. And what we're going to do is go over the basics of procedural textures. So, procedural textures behave a little bit differently than they do in cycles. So if we come over here and go to PRMan patterns, this window is going to be in the way. I'll actually move this over here. Anyway, PRMan patterns, come up here, we're going to add a nice, we'll just do a fractal for now. We're going to do a Worley later for our displacement. We're going to add a fractal. If you plug this into the base color, it does absolutely nothing. That is because right now the PXR fractal is just math. We have to use it for stuff. So to do that, we're going to go to PRMan patterns and we're going to add a PXR mix. Save before it crashes again. Then we're going to plug the result F into the mix and the RGB into the base color. Hooray, we have a fractal, that's fantastic. But it's not really easy to see the fractal, it's pretty washed out. So how we can fix that is we can add a nice Pixar Remap node. And what you do with the remap is you change the input min and input max. So if we bring this up to say 0.4, you'll notice the darks get much more dark. This is like a levels in Photoshop, for instance. Change this to like 0.6, and now we have a nice contrasty thing. So we can go to like 0.5, 0.53. Now we have a nice contrasty fractal. Very cool. You can even change the frequency up to like 12. You can change the layers up to 10. And that's all very cool. I'm going to turn this back to 5, turn this back to 1, because I prefer to do this in a manifold node. So a Pixar manifold is what tells it how to map it to the object. If we just use a 3D manifold by default, that's the default that it is already. It uses the position of the object relative to the world. So if we were to move this object, which you cannot currently do in the Renderman Interactive, but if you were to move it, the texture would not move with the object. It would swim straight through it like a little fish. So to fix that, we're going to change the coordinates to object. So now this is mapped to our object. If we were to move our object, the texture would move with it. That is very important. Then we can change the scale over here and get our repetition as we please. We'll do about a 5. So that is pretty much the basics of setting up procedural textures. You can play with the different ones, but manifold into the texture, into a mix, into a remap, into the Disney. If we wanted a colored texture instead of black and white, we could take our Pixar remap and put it into the factor of the mix. Oh, just the red. You just want a black and white texture, not an RGB. Plug it into the mix, and then you can change the colors and get neato colors. And you can do tons of these mixes if you want to. You can mix different procedurals. That is the very absolute basics of procedural texturing in Renderman in Blender. Man. So, moving on to displacement, we're going to have to stop our interactive render because updated geometry does not show up in the interactive render. Go ahead and save a couple times. Anyway, to add displacement, which is very cool by the way, we're going to cut this loose just so you see it on the solid colored sphere. Anyway, to add that, go over to the material. It crashed yet again. It's a good thing we're saving frequently. Okay, displacement, save, come over here to the material, and where it says displacement none, select PXR standard displacement. There's currently no way to add it in the Blender node interface. This gives us a PXR STD displacement node right here. I'm assuming STD stands for standard, not the other acronym. Then we can take our thing and plug it straight into scalar displacement, which is traditional displacement. Black is down, white is up. But we want black to be the base and white to extrude out, so we're going to change the displacement center, displacement map center to 0. So now black is the absolute base, which means that everything's going to extrude out from our base sphere rather than in and out. So then, if we hit I'm not going to hit it yet. This is very strong by default. I'm afraid it's going to crash, which is why I'm not showing this step by step. But we're going to change this down to like 0.2 and then go ahead and hit Start Interactive Render. And you will notice, if we just give it a second here, that we now have our object's geometry actually displacing completely based on the shader. How unbelievably cool is that? We're going to give it a second here to finish. But I mean, just think of how useful that is. You can update a model very, very easily and efficiently using displacement, and it displaces the surface based on how close you are to it at time of render, and it is very fast as opposed to using the displacement modifier in Blender. So if we go ahead and stop our interactive render, I'm expecting it to crash anytime soon here. I'm sorry. I love Renderman. I can't wait until the crashing is fixed. Just be expecting it. But anyway, We can edit this. Let's say we want a smoother transition between the displacement and the noise. We can change this to 0.4 and this to 0.7, and that'll give us a nice, or let's go to 0.8, heck. That'll give us a nice blend between the displacement. We can go ahead and hit, I'm just gonna set off a render area right here and just render it a bunch of times instead of using that, since the displacement doesn't happen in render anyway. We're going to set this just to 20 samples to go super fast. We'll go ahead and hit render. I noticed that most of the crashes happen around the interactive displacement. I'm not sure why that is, but you notice since we smoothed out the curve a little bit of where we're cutting off, we get a nice smoother displacement. I'm actually going to go ahead and darken our material a bit just so we can see the details a little bit better, and hit render again. And during this render, we will see all of the fine details generated from our displacement. That's pretty cool. We get this cool coral looking object. Now, one of my favorite ways to use the displacement is with the Whirly, which I'm going to start the interactive again just to show you the Whirly texture. We're going to disconnect the displacement, hit start interactive rendering, it crashes. Go back to our file, go ahead and hit start interactive rendering. Okay, so how you use the Whirly, or what the Whirly is, give it a second here to catch up. That's our catch-up song. So anyway, we're going to add a PXR Whirly, and we're going to create sort of a neat little coral kind of displacement map. When I'm creating displacement maps, I create them on the base color just to see what they look like, then apply them to displacement. That seems to be a pretty good workflow for me. So we're going to go ahead and add our PXR Manifold 3D, plug it in, change this to Object, save. Then we're going to add a nice PXR mix and plug this into the base color. And we get this neato looking thing. It's like cells. It's so cool. We're going to flip these colors inside out. So we'll do white here, black here, and then we're going to up the scale to 10 all the way. So we get these nice little bumps. Actually, let's just do it at 8. So that gives us these nice little cool little bumps. Then we can take this and put it through a PXR remap and up the darkness a little bit. So now we get this cool cell structure on our sphere. We're going to go ahead and stop the interactive rendering and plug in our displacement. Alright, that was super easy. So we're going to go ahead and plug the R channel into our displacement, plug the displacement into displacement. And what that's going to give us is, unplug the base color. Let's go ahead and make like a purple coral object. Or we can color based on our texture. We can go ahead and hit PXR mix, plug it in, and let's go ahead and copy this, paste this, paste this. Let's make the lights nice light pink and the darks a dark purple, plug that into our base color, and let's go ahead and hit render. Just give it a second, and we have this wicked cool coral looking sea anemone kind of strange thing with our procedural texture applied, and that is pretty neat. And just think of the applications of this. You can paint a black and white texture and then just apply it as displacement, which is really cool. Like let's say you sculpt something in ZBrush, you can export a displacement map, and bam, it's actually modeled detail as opposed to a bump. And it's very easy to update. If we had extruded all these by hand, that would be an absolute pain to update. But if we just change the scale down to 3 or something, hit render again, this immediately gives us a neat little coral object with fewer limbs. And we can actually wait for that to finish just so it has less chance of kicking the bucket on us. We can actually change the output to not clamp it. I believe that will prevent it from cutting off like that. Let's go ahead and hit render again. No, it doesn't, but it's whatever. Oh, we can change the output max to stuff. I don't know. There are ways to make that less cut offy. But still, this is really cool. And it's very easy to change the length of these. Let's say we want more little limbs. Let's put the scale up to 5. And then let's change the displacement to like 0.4. We now have a sphere that pokes out even further. Give it just a second here. See, now it's poking out even further. We've got a neat little coral object. So now let's apply the displacement to fractal noise and make sort of a cool little planet thing just to show another application. We'll make the planet Earth 5.0. I don't know what happened to the other ones, but we'll make it. Okay, so I always accidentally save in IT because I'm clicked over there. Make sure you don't do that. Don't follow my example. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're just going to move Mr. Sphere over here a little bit. And we're going to add another sphere, just because it's so easy. We're going to move him up, add a nice subdivision surface by hitting Control 1. And then we're going to come over here, add a new one. It crashed. At least we saved. Alright, add a new Renderman Node tree. We have our nice PXR Disney. IT has responded. Great. So now we're going to use a fractal for displacement. It's the exact same setup. It's very easy. But then we're going to take it a step further and use our fractal for colors to make sort of like a really cartoony planet. So if we come over here, we're going to go ahead and hop into interactive render just to see the progress of our texture. Our waiting song. Okay, so we've got our render going. Wait for Blender to respawn. And just notice how fast that is to divide it that much and extrude those things. That would take a little bit longer in cycles. It would take a lot longer if you had a very complicated scene. So anyway, to use the fractal, we're going to come over here to Blender, add a PXR fractal on top of, I don't know why everything just went blue, but we're going to go ahead. I think it applied the material to everything. It does that in the interactive sometimes. We don't really care. We're going to add a PXR mix, plug you into the RGB. Now we have our fractal applied to everything. It's not actually applied to everything. Keep that in mind. It's just doing it for the interactive render. It's like a small glitch or something. We'll go ahead and save again. And then let's create a planet texture. That means we need like the blacks to be solid black and the white to be nice and smooth, so we can get a nice rough terrain. So we're going to go ahead and add in a PXR remap. And we're going to change the input to like 0.5 to get some nice islands. Okay, that's going to get annoying really fast. I'm going to restart it. Wait for it to catch up. Just a second. So if it catches up, I've noticed it also has less chance of crashing. It's very interesting. I need to like start documenting what causes it to crash. So go ahead and stop the interactive render. We'll go ahead and restart it. Crashes anyway. I notice most crashes revolve around the interactive render for me. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start interactive render. And now it should not be applied to everything. Just give it a second to boot up here. Okay, we've got our nice fractal material. We've got our water set. We've got our nice islands. Let's go ahead and plug in a manifold and tile it some just to get smaller islands. And I think what we can do is actually change this up to like 0.6 to get some even smaller islands. Then we're going to add our PXR manifold 3D. 3D, the difference between that, every time I add a node it seems to do that. That's interesting. Change this to object. Go ahead and stop our interactive render. Give it a second to catch up here. Okay, stop it there, stop it there. Mess around with the parameters a little bit. I've noticed that causes it to crash less. We're going to change the scale up to 2. And nope, crashed again. I'm sorry for all the crashing during the thing. It's still a very beta thing. But anyway, we are going to start our interactive render just to get our planet texture exactly how we want. So the manifold 2D is generally based on your ST or UV coordinates. The 3D is based on the 3D object. I think this looks pretty good for a planet texture, actually, so let's go ahead and plug this into the displacement and see what we get. Go ahead and stop our interactive rendering. Save again. So again, to do displacement, we come over here to our materials panel. Under displacement, we hit standard displacement. Then what we're going to do is cut this. Okay. Come over here, hit PXR standard displacement. Then we're going to cut this, save. Actually, we want this plugged in. We want to cut this. Keep saving just because it crashes frequently. Then we are going to plug the red channel into our displacement, change the displacement to about 0.1-ish, just to make some neat little islands that'll affect the silhouette of our planet. Okay, so then we can go ahead and hit render, because most problems circle around the interactive render when crashing. Give it just a second to catch up here. You notice we've got these cool islands on our thing now, but we want the water to be blue and we want the islands to be green. How would we do that? Well, it's very, very easy. And I will show you in just a second as soon as this catches up. Notice our render bar is going full speed ahead like a train. Alright, so now that that's happened, what we can do is take our PXR mix and plug this into another PXR Remap node. This is still using our exact same coordinates, so we're going to have the coordinates affected in the same way. We're going to plug the RGB over here to the input color. We're going to plug our... Well, that was actually pretty unexpected. It doesn't usually crash randomly like that. It crashes around renders or interactive renders, usually. Anyway, go ahead and plug this into our PXR remap. Then we're going to plug the RGB into another mix node. We'll do PXR mix. And then we're going to plug that into our base color. Anyway, we want this to be less smooth than this, because otherwise we're going to have a nice blue gradient going up on our islands. We want a flat, solid color. So what we're going to do is change the min to the same min as over here, which is 0.6. Then we're going to change this to 0.62. So we'll have white clamped all the way down to 0.62 and black clamped all the way to 0.6. So then we take our blacks and map that to a blue, and we'll take our whites and map those to green with our PXR mix. Then if we go ahead and hit render and give it just a second. View. Okay, give this a second. I'm gonna close IT because this is on a different channel and I don't know how to change that. Yeah. So discard all of our changes there and render again. And give it just a second to pop up here. And you'll notice that didn't work at all, and I know exactly why. We're going to give this a second to finish here, just so there's less chance of it crashing. But the reason that it didn't work anyway is because we plugged the RGB into the mix. We want a number into the mix, a 1 or 0, black or white, just grayscale, which is the R, or the G, or the B. They're all identical since this is a black and white texture. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and plug the red into the mix and hit render again. And now we have a nice planet. That's very cool. But we don't want the texture or the specular to be so hard on our terrain. We can fix that very easily using yet another PXR mix node. Okay, I had to do that to get that to go away. Okay, so we can do that using another PXR mix node. Close you again because you're being a pain. Okay, so patterns, PXR mix, and take the red, plug that in there. So we're going to plug this into the roughness, which white is fully rough, black is not rough at all for our specular. Right now it's at 0.25 actually, so we're going to up this value to 0.1, get a nice sharp specular, and we'll change the roughness down to about 0.7. Then we'll plug this into our roughness, not the RGB. Notice the gray dot to gray dot, yellow dot to yellow dot. Then we'll hit render. Give it just a second here. And just like that, we've got a nice rough island and a nice sharp water, which is very cool. That is looking pretty sweet, if I do say so myself. Okay, so we've gone over very basic displacement. So now I'm going to pause the recording and find a nice vector displacement map to show you what that does, because that is the coolest thing ever. But anyway, again, just think of the applications here. Any texture, you can use procedurals or images. You can even just use text and it will displace perfectly. Text as a texture, a black and white texture, and it will displace absolutely perfectly, and you can model stuff without having to model it. How awesome is that? Now, general workflow in the industry is to use displacement for bigger features that you're displacing, like the big islands, then bump for smaller displacement. Renderman is so good at displacement that you can really use displacement for some of the smaller features too. It's fantastic. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. Okay, we are back, and now we're going to go over vector displacement, which as opposed to traditional displacement, which just goes up or down, vector displacement can go side to side. It's like mixing displacement with a tangent normal map, kind of. I'm probably completely off on that. You can yell at me in the comments. That's great. But anyway, how we do this, I'm just going to show you in Blender, by the way. I'm not going to show you how to make a vector displacement map in ZBrush or Mudbox. Maybe in a future tutorial. But anyway, how we do this is we come over here to PRMan patterns, and we're going to add a PXR texture node. Not a PXRP texture, be careful not to hit that one, but the PXR texture. That'll come in with 2 nodes, like so. We're going to come over here, select our displacement map, which will usually be an EXR for maximum quality. And I actually got this map from the Solid Angle website. I'll provide a link in the description. That's the company that makes Arnold, so I'm kind of like a trader right now since I've been doing this in Renderman. But anyway, then we come to our materials. Good thing I saved. Come over to our materials and hit the add PXR displacement, and we're going to plug our texture into the vector, yellow to blue, a little bit unintuitive. And there's one more step, actually 2 more steps we have to do. First, we have to tell this which software package our vector displacement map came from. That's right here, the first drop down. You can't expand it long enough to see it, but this is the displacement type. So we're going to hit the drop down and we're going to choose Mudbox Vector for this particular map. If you did your map in ZBrush, you would use the ZBrush option in the drop down. And after that, we're going to turn off Invert T. If you have your UVs set up properly on your object, you do not need this checkbox. It will screw up your vector displacement. Then that's about all there is to it. We have our displacement map there. Now we can hit Interactive Render. And bam, we have an ear on our geometry. How unbelievably cool is that? We have a fully fledged model coming out of our 1 polygon plane using vector displacement. And notice how it does go side to side up here. You would not be able to do that with standard displacement. But the other benefit to this is, let's say you want to change this. You modeled this ear by hand. It would be an absolute pain to add tons of them. But using vector displacement, I'm expecting this to crash again really soon, but using vector displacement, we can say we want 3 ears by 3 ears, and bam. Just like that, we have 3 ears by 3 ears modeled into our plane. How awesome is that? There are some downfalls to vector displacement, like you really need to avoid seams and whatnot. But otherwise, it's a very useful, very cool tool. And you'll notice when you zoom in, you have a little bit of faceting. You can fix that with the shading rate in Renderman. That's very easy. Come over to the render settings, come down to advanced, and change the shading rate to like 0.5. Then if we hit render again, you'll notice that our ears are all nice, or they're smoother if we compare. Okay, so notice how faceted this one is, and then this one's not faceted at all. We'll flop between them. Yeah, so changing the shading rate will change the amount of divisions that it adds to your geometry on render. And that basically concludes our tutorial on displacement. Very useful feature, very cool. Allows you to add model detail to your models without actually modeling the detail, and Renderman is very, very fast at it. If you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure you hit the subscribe button for more. The next one I do is probably going to be the basics of layering materials in the Renderman node interface and adding textures. But other than that, that concludes our tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.